Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. I don't know when the next meeting will be, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said, casting doubt on whether planned trilateral US-Russia-Ukraine peace talks will go ahead this weekend. As Washington's focus may be shifting toward rising tensions with Iran, Ukraine faces continued strikes on logistics and civilian targets, despite a limited pause on energy infrastructure attacks. To help us understand what this uncertainty means for diplomacy and the battlefield, we're now joined by Chris York, news editor of the Kyiv Independent. Good to have you on TVP World.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So there was a lot of anticipation with these meetings. We had a week ago in Abu Dhabi. Now these words by President Zelensky. So what's your take on this? Will this meeting go ahead? What's plausible in the next less than 24 hours?
I mean, it would seem pretty last minute to arrange what would be such a big meeting in 24 hours. But I think the overarching thing that everyone has to remember here is that the Russians are clinging for time. When we had 2 days of talks, after the first day, there was a huge mass missile and drone strike on Kyiv and other cities. And those aren't really the actions of a country that would be interested in a peace process in any sort of genuine manner.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, let's talk about that, because this is we need to put some context into this. We've had the request by President Trump to say to Vladimir Putin, don't strike Ukraine for a week. The Kremlin has said, well, that's been acknowledged, but then it was only until February 1st. The Ukrainians have said that that's already in essence been broken. We've had strikes on Donetsk in the last few hours, it seems. So where are we with this is it even a ceasefire at this point? How do we take this?
I mean, there's a lot of confusion about it. Donald Trump said he'd asked Putin for a week-long pause on Ukrainian cities and towns, and those were his words, Ukrainian cities and towns, and he said that on Thursday. But then the Kremlin came out yesterday and said that they'd only agreed to not attack Kyiv until Sunday. And then later on the same day, yesterday, Zelensky said that the week-long pause would actually start last night. So there's a lot of confusion about not only the scope of this supposed ceasefire or truce, but also when it started and when it began. The last big attack on Kyiv was a week ago, so that would be in line with what Russia said about not attacking Kyiv until tomorrow. But then there was a huge attack on energy infrastructure in Odessa on Tuesday. So clearly what Trump said about it applying to Ukrainian cities and towns isn't necessarily true in light of that. And I think what's really worth pointing out here is that a week-long pause in mass missile and drone attack isn't actually that unusual. That often happens. Russia has to, after it launches one of these huge attacks, it has to then rearm its bomber aircraft. It has to stockpile missiles and drones, deploy them to different airfields, and then plan the attacks, which is a hugely complicated process. So this week-long pause isn't actually, if it does happen, isn't actually that unusual in the regular sort of tempo that Russia follows. So what it seems to appear that the Kremlin is doing here is trying to build some political goodwill and some capital with Donald Trump for doing something that it would probably be doing anyway.
Mm-hmm. All right. And also, I mean, as you've said, various strikes continue. Also, we have information from this morning that Donetsk, for instance, was also struck, looking at certain types of logistics. Railways also struck there. How significant do you think that is? What does that tell us?
Well, this is another thing that really needs pointed out. I know it's only the sort of huge attacks, particularly on Kyiv, that tend to make it into the headlines around the world. But last night and the night before were what we would describe in Ukraine as quiet nights. But the 2 nights ago, that still involved Russia launching 110 kamikaze attack drones, and last night I think the number was 63 attack drones. And another thing I think it's worth pointing out here for people that may not understand what an attack drone actually is, we're not talking about these small quadcopter hobby drones. We're talking about massive 3.5 meters long by 2.5 meter wide kamikaze drones that with a 60-kilogram warhead that are still flying over the skies of Ukraine every night. So while some people might look from the outside and from abroad and think, oh, it's been a quiet night in Ukraine, Russia is still launching a lot of these drones and missiles at targets. And yeah, this particular truce or ceasefire this week might apply to energy infrastructure. But one of the really concerning trends that we've seen in recent weeks is an apparent uptick on attacks on transport infrastructure. There was a really bad attack on a train in Kyiv Oblast a few days ago, 6 people killed. And, the trains are, particularly near frontline areas, they are absolutely critical, full of usually civilians, but also soldiers returning maybe for some respite on rotation from the front. And if Russia is going to say, sure, we won't attack energy infrastructure for a while, but we're also going to attack, but while we're doing that, we're going to attack transport infrastructure. Again, these are not the actions of a country that has any desire to negotiate in peace negotiations in any sort of good faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on that, as you've explained here and as you've told us, this patchwork of certain ceasefires, but then again, Russia not really relenting in any way, also with temperatures dropping to record low levels. If these talks go ahead in Abu Dhabi this weekend, and if they sincerely are going to take place, these trilaterals, what, in your mind, what, if anything, are the expectations? How sincere do you think Russia is in all this? Will we get any kind of progress from that meeting if it takes place?
To put it bluntly, no. And in Ukraine, there is absolutely no expectation that Russia is going to stop fighting. As far as Putin is spinning it to the Russian people, the Russian army is still advancing in the east. This campaign against the country's energy infrastructure, which has pretty much been going on since October 2022, but this particular uptick since October of last year has had pretty significant effects on the ground here. This time last week, 80% of Kyiv was without electricity. The situation has improved during the week, but again, worth pointing out that the sort of baseline for what is a good situation in Kyiv right now is 12 hours of power cuts a day rather than 20 hours of power cuts a day. And so Russia sees all of these things, or at least tries to spin these things as evidence that they are winning in Ukraine and that they have the sort of tactical advantage. But there was a really good report came out earlier this week, actually, from I think the Center for Strategic and International Studies that laid bare the actual position that Russia is in now. And when you take a step back after nearly 4 years of war, Russia's lost more men than any country in any war since World War II. And these advances in the east, which Putin likes to frame as evidencing, are actually slower than the British in the Battle of the Somme in World War I. And so Putin's sort of in a bit of a hole, and he doesn't have many options. He can't stop fighting because he can't declare victory right now. He would have to, and this is why he's trying to force the US to force Ukraine to hand over the rest of the Donbas, because that's the bare minimum that he would need to spin this full-scale invasion as a victory to the Russian people. So until he can convince the US to do that, and Ukraine is going to push back on that massively, obviously, then there's not going to be any progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll have to see how those, and if those talks do take place, will come out of it. You mentioned as well Territorial. This is something also that Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that it's the only sticking point. It's a big sticking point, but they said apparently that's where they are. So that'll be unique to see how they address that. Also, speaking of allies as well, there's been a recent video call between the Polish and Ukrainian defense ministers, I believe just in the last sort of day or so. They talked about more increased support, including what we have here, expanded air defense, Poland pledging radar, MiG-29 support, etc. How significant do you think that's going to be, and how quickly will those kind of assets be deployed to Ukraine to make a difference?
I mean, it's difficult to say how quickly they'll get here. I mean, often there'll be an announcement of something and it can take up to a year for things to get here. I mean, the difficulty is with all of these different countries giving different weapon systems to Ukraine. It means that Ukraine is now operating, if we talk about aircraft, for example, Ukraine's operating a fleet of aircraft which has Polish jets, French jets, American jets, and that's a really, really difficult thing to do because the logistics and the supply chains, they all require different parts, different technical expertise. So, I mean, obviously it's welcome. Any support is welcome. But, I mean, I think it's worth just taking a step back and looking at Europe in general, and it's clearly not enough. You know, like, we are still getting hit regularly here with missiles. There was a period a couple of years ago, a year ago, where if a mass missile attack struck Kyiv, it was relatively okay because everything was getting intercepted. These days, a lot of missiles are getting through. We're not necessarily short of air defense systems. It's the interceptor missiles that are fired by those systems, which are in short supply worldwide. So, yeah, while Poland sending more weapons and defense equipment is welcome, it's still not enough for Ukraine at this moment. And the evidence of that is currently the situation that we're in Kyiv and all around the country, where the energy infrastructure is really, really struggling.
Mm-hmm. Just conscious of the time, but I want to get your quick comment on this. What you said, it's not enough what Europe is sending, European support as well. This week, we've heard that President Zelensky wants that fast-track EU membership. He was hoping for a date of the 1st of January 2027. That's been ruled out, particularly by the German Chancellor. How is that received in Ukraine right now?
I mean, EU membership isn't, I think because it's been in the background for so long and it's been such a slow process, it's not something which is sort of in the general public consciousness. I think people have become a bit jaded by it. But I think one of the really interesting things about EU membership is that everybody talks about NATO's Article 5, but EU membership actually has its own similar defense clause, and it's actually stronger than NATO's Article 5. Article 5 says that, it leaves a lot of wiggle room. It says it's up to individual states to decide what they can do. But the EU's, I can't remember the specific name of the article, but it says that all EU member states have to do everything within their power to assist a country under attack. So I do think that's one thing that's really worth keeping an eye on if this EU membership does finally speed up and come to fruition.
Mm-hmm. All right. And given everything that's happened, just a quick takeaway, what do you think in the next sort of week or so? Will there be any sort of concrete new, let's say, peace agreements, any ceasefires? How do you see the next week shape up?
I think the only thing that is guaranteed in the upcoming week is that as soon as this Kremlin proposed truce to stop attacking Kyiv on Sunday will be followed by another huge mass attack on the energy infrastructure here. And that's the only thing that I could predict with any sort of certainty.
All right. So thanks for giving us your insights there. That was Chris York from Kyiv Independent. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for news and commentary. Goodbye.